Discussion around The Acolyte, the latest Star Wars television series, has been, to put it lightly,
a hellscape.
Ratings on sites like IMDb seem to be a mix of review bombs claiming that it has killed the franchise and 10 on 10s from fans trying to balance it out. Not to say that there aren't people who generally feel both of these ways, but episodes getting negative reviews before they are released and reviews on an unrelated movie called Acolytes, referring to it as the worst Star Wars, sure do make my point here. Now, I'm not here to get involved in the culture war discourse. I'm just looking to discuss the show based on its own merits. Look at the good and bad elements, because yes, there are both, and discuss my thoughts on the series as a whole. Let's do this. Here's what I want to do, Internet. I want to look at the show for what it is. I think, as a piece of media, it deserves to be looked at critically beyond all the nonsense arguing that exists around it. I don't hate the show because it lacks white men or any of that other bullshit. I am just a lifelong Star Wars fan who wants to engage with a piece of Star Wars on its own merits. Also, quick disclaimer, if you don't like The Acolyte, that's fine. Not everything is for everyone. Just don't be a dick about it. People who don't like a thing can stop watching. And to the people who unabashedly love it, that's great. I'm going to be critical at times here, but that shouldn't take away from what it gives you. Okay? Cool. So in discussing The Acolyte, I think the first thing to do is go over what I think works in Star Wars, because that is wildly different for different people. For example, while I have read some Legend stuff, back when it was just called the Extended Universe, they weren't as big a deal to me as the films. So while I was definitely the kid who grew up taking dives into the depths of Wikipedia, that's always been for fun to me, not gospel. That's why changing a character's age doesn't bother me, because it's not breaking the movies, and even if it did, it's not a big deal. Luke and Leia were not Darth Vader's kids before Empire Strikes Back, and there's even supplemental materials after the original film that stated that they had different ages. And that is fine. Canon is not a big deal to me as long as we are telling good stories. What I do want from Star Wars is a good remixing of ideas. George Lucas took fighter pilot movies, westerns, and samurai films and made something new from them. In The Phantom Menace, he even added his passion for car racing, his original dream career, in the pod racing sequence, and that is one of the best parts of that film. All that to say, I really appreciate the inclusion of martial arts in The Acolyte. Star Wars as a whole needed a new element like this, as we've been seeing mostly the same kind of action since the beginning. Varying takes on that action, but still, it's blaster duels and sword fights. And not to say that there hasn't been great fight scenes over the years, I'd say, despite it being the worst of the sequel films, in my opinion, Rise of Skywalker had some really cool fight choreography. I just think that adding Mei, a play on a ninja assassin archetype, really deepens things here, especially since this is set so far in the past as the first real depiction of the High Republic. Getting a look at older, more lost forms of combat really works for me. On the topic of the High Republic, I do want to bring up what I feel as a bigger negative, and that is the aesthetic. And this isn't a criticism of just the Acolyte, but Star Wars as a whole. I feel like the series has an aesthetic that is a little too status quo. If you told the casual viewer that this took place at the same time as the original films or Ashoka, I think they would believe you. It all feels a bit too samey in terms of sets and costume design. Plenty has been said about the prequels over the years and how technology felt more advanced than it does in the originals. I know there have been explanations for that both in and out of various canons, but I'm not going to touch on that. But it does allow us to see a divide in eras from before and after the Emperor's takeover. So with that in mind, I think there could have been more done to make the High Republic feel a little more like a unique time period. This isn't a rewrite video, of which I've done many in the past, so I'm not going to get too deep into my own ideas, but I think that it could have been a fun detail to make droids less prevalent in the High Republic. That would do two things here. One, it would make Osha's work as a mech more interesting. If droids exist in different forms, sort of like Pip, the small one she carries, or the large stationary door guard in episode 2, we can see a need for more dangerous jobs like ship repair. Second, it would paint the prequel era as an age of technological peak for the world. With droids so commonplace, they can be used as entire armies, and have taken over the dangerous jobs. Then you can just throw some fun different styles of clothing on your non-Jedis, and the Acolyte can feel a lot more like a defined moment in time. Sadly, Disney and Lucasfilm wouldn't do that because then it would feel less like the Star Wars we know, and their business model is built on selling fans the brand they are familiar with. It's that complaint that modern Star Wars is about Star Wars, a complaint I very much understand. It's why I didn't enjoy Obi-Wan, despite some very good elements, and why I didn't feel like Ahsoka was going to be for me and I skipped it. That, and I'm not well versed in the animated side of Star Wars, so that show didn't feel like it was for me at all. And that is fine. Again, not everything needs to be for everyone. To the point of Star Wars being about Star Wars, that is typically said to mean that we are just getting the same ideas, characters, and general vibes over and over again. Now obviously, with a franchise, there are going to be elements of that, of course. But as I said, I am someone who likes new things added into my Star Wars. I like new ideas. New ideas don't need to be radical additions, 100% new elements, but can be looking at what we have from a new direction, like the Force. The inclusion of the witches and how they approach the Force is one of my favorite elements. They don't come at it from the light and dark dichotomy we are used to from the Jedi and Sith. They also clearly have an understanding of the Force and how it works that is different, as seen by how it is manipulated to create the twins. And that doesn't take away from Anakin's conception and make him less unique. There is a difference between using the Force to do something and the Force doing it on its own. If the Force suddenly started moving objects without a person willing it to, that would hit different. Overall, I think it just ties into that old George Lucas clip, say it with me.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
The witch's approach to the Force makes me think of the Tree of Life in our real world, an idea that I think is really cool. While the details vary from culture to culture, we see multiple different takes on a Tree of Life and its imagery across multiple religions and mythologies. I think it lends credence to the general concept, and the same can be said in Star Wars.
I just think they're neat.
I think the worst thing about the show, aside from the discourse, is the show's pace. Now let me get this straight, I do not mind that some episodes run for like 30 minutes. I think making an episode that tells one specific part of a wider story and doesn't try to overstretch it is a really cool thing that you can do on streaming but not traditional cable. I think that's cool, but it doesn't always work. I would say that the third episode, the first flashback episode, Destiny, could have been shorter, despite enjoying it a lot more than other people did. Including the scene-to-scene pace, I think the script could have used a tightening draft. Condensing it down by like 5 minutes tops could have helped sell the episode and its themes even harder. The problem is, this show feels like it's in a weird middle ground creatively. It either needed to cut some elements, though I'm not sure what, to make it a film, or expand on the elements with a longer season. I hope I'm making sense here, but the season feels both light and heavy at the same time. It's not something I feel like I can simply explain unless I were to revisit the whole show and break it down in details, but it does just give a vibe that's a little off. Let me know if a breakdown like that is something worth making its own video about. Lastly, I want to touch on the fight choreography. This is something that has been a bit of a hot button issue for several Disney Star Wars projects now, the Acolyte being the latest one. And I liked it. As I already said, the martial arts added a fun flavor to the show, but also there's episode 5's big duel. The scene is an excellent set piece. Not only is the choreography on point with the hits feeling impactful, but also it tells the story. Not just on how the stranger killed all those people, but by showing who characters are through how they fight. That is something that all good fight scenes do, and I think this one nails it. We can see who Jackie is, young and eager to prove herself, in how she fights, versus the stranger who is much more aggressive in his moves, and Saul who clearly has years of practice and form under his belt. Now, I know there are people criticizing how if you slow down the moments, you show small issues in the same way people did so with the throne room scene from The Last Jedi. This is the only part of others' criticisms I'm really going to touch on in this, because that is stupid. The idea of slowing down footage to look for mistakes is bad faith criticism, because the audience is not made to experience the scene in that way. In the same way you wouldn't judge a comedy special on mute because you wouldn't be able to engage with every joke. Sure, you could dissect a lot looking at body language or how good the physical comedy plays, but that's an incorrect way to study a comedy special. And even then, I think that would be a better exercise than slowing down a fight. Slowing down, looking frame by frame, discounts character beats, the way the choreography is telling a story, all of that, in hopes of finding a gotcha moment. On top of that, doing so to the original era Star Wars can do the same thing. We all know the clip. Put in the slow down Luke kick here. And that's what I find funny, because there are a lot of issues in The Acolyte that exist throughout all of Star Wars. None of The Acolyte's dialogue is worse than any of the bad lines Lucas wrote over the years, and the show also suffers from that need to make too many characters stoic, leading to some potentially wooden line deliveries. While these things can be a little annoying, and improved with a light rewrite, I don't think any of this is in any way egregious. Issues like this can be worse for some than others, but I think a lot of people who act like this is unforgivable are just people looking to hate it. Just like the portrayal of Jedi in the series. The Acolyte isn't saying that the Jedi are the worst, or that they deserve to be taken out in Order 66. What it is doing is taking a nuanced look at the Order, specifically highlighting that members are still people, and like all people, make mistakes. In particular, I appreciate the way the series points out how the Order became set in their ways, blinded by their power and comfort to see the truth. Themes like that existed in the prequel films, and that's why they used Ki-Adi-Mundi to be the voice of that, because that's who he was in the films as well. The series also points out that forcing children to decide if they should abandon their lives and homes forever to be trained as Jedi isn't the best of ideas. I mean, I'm sure glad I wasn't forced to pick my career in kindergarten, then only learn how to do that for the rest of my life. I'm also definitely glad it didn't happen because a charming stranger swayed me to do it by telling me how special I am. The Jedi Order may have been peacekeepers and produced some of the galaxy's greatest heroes, but we still have to look at an organization like that seriously. If a government, or more accurately, a private military unit working with the government, were deemed the sole police force in our entire world, we would definitely question it. And with good cause, because humanity is fallible. The Acolyte, while not doing a full-on story of internal corruption, does play with these themes in a way that fits the world that we are looking at. Also, just one last thing, I love when casting subverts the expectations an audience has for an actor based on prior work, and this show nails that with Manny Jacinto. A highlight for sure. He's great in this. So hot. All in all, I do think that The Acolyte is a good, solid show. It isn't peak like Andor, but it is definitely a step above something like The Book of Boba Fett that felt like such a letdown. It's solid entertainment is what I'm getting at. I do wish that this show hadn't been so defined by the people who hate it just for existing, so that way the people who generally like the show can enjoy it without having to make it into a fight. They shouldn't have to defend what they like so much. But this is Star Wars. What would it be at this point if not ruined by toxic fans trying to keep it in the past? Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Please like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. I got plenty more videos if you want about stuff like Star Wars and other things. So until next time, have a good one.